Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
All right, everyone. Well, we just interviewed Alex Craib and Mason. It's not Burkett. Shit.
Niquette.
Yep. Well, everyone, we just interviewed Alex Craib and Mason Niquette. I said it fucking wrong again. Niquette. I did an M. Jesus, this is going to go in the front. Chris is going to edit this to the front. This is how the episode's going to fucking start. Welcome to episode 152 of a Life in Ruins podcast, where we investigate the careers and research of those living a life in ruins. I am your host, Carlton Shield Chief Gover, and I am joined by my featured co-hosts, Alex Craib, who previously joined the podcast for episode 26 of Our Ruin Lives with Alex Craib. And appearing for the first time is Mason Niquette. Mason and Alex, thank you guys so much for joining. How are you guys doing this evening? I guess we'll start off with you, Alex. How have you been since you've last been on the podcast?
Not too bad. Finishing up this PhD at some point. Accepted a salary job at Cultural Resource Analysts out in Lexington, Kentucky, and living the dream, having a blast.
Excellent. And then Mason, please introduce yourself to the audience for the first time. Basically just where you went to school, what degrees you have, and where you're at now in life.
Sure. So my name is Mason Niquette. I did my master's and PhD at the University of Kansas. I'm a geoarchaeologist. My master's was on a pretty cool late paleo through mid-archaic site in the Ozarks. And then my dissertation was looking at site formation and geochronology at a rock shelter in West Texas. Currently, I'm also working for Cultural Resource Analysts in Lexington, Kentucky.
Excellent. We're really excited to have you both on the podcast for this very riveting discussion we're about to have. So for context, we're going to be talking about the archaeology of Warhammer 40K. And we'll delve into that subject and kind of the background behind it. But in the nerd world, some big happenings caused me to text Alex about some of the most recent reveals and we need to have an episode about this. And Alex was like, I actually have a coworker who's also a huge Warhammer 40K nerd. And just so happened when we were at the SAAs, I was having some drinks at the bar and ran into Mason. Mason's like, yeah, I know Craib. I work with him. And I'm like, are you the 40K friend? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, we're going to have you on the podcast to talk about this. So this episode is going to be kind of very similar in what we did with the archaeology of Middle Earth. However, we've really dotted our I's and crossed our T's with this episode. We're hoping to fit it all in because it's extensive. The lore behind Warhammer 40K is more extensive, I would say, than what Tolkien has. Tolkien did it himself, though. That's the caveat. Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth is Tolkien's baby, whereas 40K is contributed by many different authors and, basically a company that has been producing this game and the lore behind it since the late 80s. I think 1989 or something like that. So real quick, Mason, what armies do you collect and which factions are your favorite?
Well, right now I'm working on a little Black Templars army. Got that going for me. Got a little Leagues of Votan. Got a bunch of random chaos, nerdly models. And so Plague Marines. Yeah, I kind of just like to paint a lot of stuff and spending way too much money just getting kind of whatever. What about you?
So, yeah, I started 40K, I think when I was in 5th grade with 4th edition. And my first army were the Tyranids. So I have some of those old school Termagants and Harmagants and those pewter models of old One Eye and an old school Hive Tyrant and a couple Lictors. And then I think I ended up collecting over 64 Homagants and Termagants alone because they used to come in those big box sets of 32 before they got, you can only buy 16 at a time at the same price range now. And then I got back into it in undergraduate with 7th edition and I started playing Tau because I really like the idea of shooting armies. But then I got really bored because they're just a shooting army. They don't do melee. They don't do any of the fun stuff. And then I switched to Blood Angels, I went hardcore the opposite direction. I want a melee army. And, that's just full melee. And I love red's my favorite color. So I was gravitated. And I love their lore and the backstory. So Craib, what about you, man?
I'm an OG Dark Angels guy. I think I started my armies right around when you did 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And then I did a little bit of Tau, a little bit of Eldar just to branch out. I don't really like either one. And now I've been doing like a kit bash homebrew chapter based on my fraternity colors and heraldry and all that stuff. So it's basically like a best of all worlds Space Marines chapter. I call it Heavy Assault.
Excellent. So there's product background behind 40K, just for our viewers. It is a tabletop minis game that you paint. And early on in the 80s and 90s, it was like the background and the story you would get through your little army handbooks, codexes. There was a big old rule set that came in a book, and then you had to buy your individual army booklet. And then there'd just be kind of lore and history spread out through that. It wasn't until like the 2000s did books about Warhammer 40K be published. And for those that might be familiar with gaming, there's like Dawn of War Warhammer, and there is, like Warhammer where you kill all the rats on Steam. Same companies early on, they were actually connected. Warhammer and Warhammer 40K were kind of these weird extensions. But really since the 2000s, they've cashed in on expanding the lore of Warhammer 40K. So what is Warhammer 40K? Well, the term 40K for us archaeology nerds and geologists, it stands for 40,000 years. So this universe where we play in the tabletop realm, we're year 40,000. So we're 20,000 years, like 38,000 years in the future. That's where we're at. And a lot of stuff happened. And with that, archaeology is present, and we'll get to that. But we're going to go through like a very, very surface level, like not even cutting the skin, like basically just like cutting the smallest pieces of hair off of your arms of the lore to kind of set the stage for why archaeology is present in the lore itself.
40,000 years in less than 4 minutes.
Hopefully. That's a bold statement, because we're gonna go off on tangents. So what we're gonna try to do in this first segment and probably into the second segment is like, we're going to go through, it's not even like 40,000. We got to set the stage for like, it starts 60 million years ago. That's when the universe starts. And so we're just going to real quickly just go through the time of the universe and into the future, and then get into like, okay, what's the archaeology? So the first part of this, and it does actually relate to 40K itself, like these people show back up, is what's called the War in Heaven. And this happened 60 million years ago. There's two main factions. The old ones, they're this benevolent beings, this race that like see the universe. They're friendly, peaceful. And then you have the Necrontyr. And Mason, can you describe the Necrontyr for us real quick?
It's like the Care Bears fighting against the anti-Care Bears.
Yeah.
So you got a group of people that are all about feelings, and then the Necrontyr who decide to sacrifice their mortal beings to space gods in exchange for immortality, so that way they can spite these Care Bears.
Yeah. So pretty much the old ones were just a bunch of like weird lizard space gods that just kind of hung out, created a bunch of life, had a great time. And then you get the Necrontyr, who were a weird little fleshy species. Their planet happened to be too close to a star. They just got cancer all the time. And it turns out that even if they left that space, they kept eating cancer. And so it turned into a whole big to-do.
Yeah. So the Necrontyr, they're basically like cancerous space Egyptians is the best way to describe that faction. Their lifespans were like 40 years. They were too close to a star, and there's some other things that were happening that created this weird stuff. Super focused on immortality through basically everyone wanted to be an Alexander the Great, and that was their focus on. So their spacefaring society was a fucking wreck because everyone was concerned about themselves. It wasn't holistic. They united against the old ones because the old ones wouldn't basically help their space cancer. And they went to war. Didn't go so great for the Necrontyr. They ended up coming in contact with basically a different race of space gods in a different dimensional plane known as the Catan. They made an alliance and they absolutely wrecked the old ones. As a response, the old ones created species specifically meant to fight the Necrontyr and the Catan, the Eldari and the Kork. And the Kork are basically ancestral orcs. And They ended up losing to the Necrontyr and the Catan, but then the Necrontyr found out that the Catan were the troubles of all their space cancer, and during the war tricked the Necrontyr into giving up their fleshy beings and downloading themselves into mechanical automaton, where only the elites of the Necrontyr kept their consciousness. And so they betrayed the Catan in one of the most like epic battles of betrayal, and like just hunted them. But as a result, the Necrontyr were severe. This is when they become the Necrons, is when they go from like fleshy Egyptians with cancer to mechanical Egyptians. Basically, there's pyramids, like there's a whole thing, and you just have to Google what they are, and everything is very Egyptian. Like there's pyramids and obelisks. That's the vibe.
But also like space obelisks and like space pyramids.
Yes. Like space scarabs. Like it's very, but they're green. They glow and mechanical. You know, it's like, it's a whole thing. Yeah. But during this war, the Eldari and the court kind of made a comeback, and the Necrons were like, we need to go into hibernation. And basically, because we're going to lose, like if we keep fighting, we're going to lose. So they basically put everyone in stasis and go to sleep up until the 41st millennium. So that's the background. But during that time, there's a dimension called the warp, which is where you basically light speed occurs, and it's a reflection of the material world. And because there is so much chaos and death, it turned this like gorgeous wellspring of life into a chaotic mess, and it basically becomes known as the warp. And we'll get to that later, because that's just like a whole separate, you got the material plane, and then you got space hell. It's space hell, and that space hell is where space travel takes place, and it gets fucking crazy.
It gets a little bananas pretty quick.
Yeah, it gets that. The whole war in heaven basically poisons that, and it just becomes this horrible, horrible place that's a reflection of the war in heaven, because the war in heaven took place over like millions of years, basically genocide on a galactic scale. Moving forward up until 40,000 years ago, this is the Age of Terror. So it's the same Earth history up until today, but there are some pretty important events that occur. Craib, could you take a crack at some of the more pivotal moments of how what happens here on Earth affects the universe in Warhammer 40K?
So arguably the most important event that happens is the birth of the Emperor of Mankind, or the being that would become the Emperor of Mankind. He's basically a immortal space being that can reanimate himself in different bodies and accrue this long-term kind of memory and understanding of time. And he gets the idea that he's going to start directing humanity on the right path. So the Star Child Emperor comes about sometime 10,000 BCE, Fertile Crescent, that sort of area.
And he gets born because basically a bunch of mystic shamans like predicate in the future shit's going to be bad for humankind.
Yeah, so there's a couple different theories about how the Emperor came about, whether he was just an individual being that appeared and had this psychic magnitude to him, or if he was actually a culmination of multiple kind of psychic beings coming together, seeing the future and knowing that humanity needed like a protector kind of deal, and they fused their psychic might together and created this god baby, kind of like Jesus in a tuxedo t-shirt.
Yeah. So basically, like all these like mystic shamans from across like the old world come together at Çatalhöyük and commit ritual suicide to fuse their mental spiritual essence into the Emperor of Mankind. And he does become Jesus because he's like right now in our world, he's just laying low. He's immortal, and he just kind of pops up through history to like try to steer people in the right way. So he is Jesus and Muhammad and all these leaders throughout our history that kind of show up and try to change things and ultimately like just disappear. Like he's just hiding. Yep. It's weird. He's super important for 30K. So,
I mean, it only takes like 30,000 years to become relevant. It's fine.
Yeah, he's just like, he's just sitting in the back with popcorn, just like, this is fucked. And then so Mason, why are the Middle Ages important for the context of the universe?
So the Middle Ages are kind of when shit goes sideways. So we briefly mentioned like the idea of the warp. The warp is kind of like a reflection of, I don't know, humanity, aliens, all their kind of things, and all their like feelings, thoughts, ideas, all this kind of stuff, like bring itself and manifests within the warp, if that makes the best sense.
It's like a psychic reflection.
Yeah, it's like a psychic reflection of what's happening. But pretty much during this time period, we get the Crusades and the birth of the blood god Khorne during a lot of time of hyperviolence, who wants skulls for the skull throne and blood for the blood god. You get mass periods of disease during the Black Plague, and you get the creation of this new god called Nurgle, who is all about decay and disease. And then you also get Tzeentch, who I admittedly do not know nearly enough about.
Yeah. So Khorne is born basically from the Crusades. Like, there's so many people out there trying to kill for their god that their psychic energy creates a fucking terrorist god in the warp, who is just the god of war and death. Then there's Tzeentch, who is kind of like this god of knowledge, but it's like it's the warranted pursuit of knowledge, which is bad, just like knowledge for knowledge's sake. And he's born from like all these feudalistic scholars trying to reinvent society and religion, so he's a reflection of that. Nurgle comes from the Black Plague, so there's massive death from plague from China all the way to Europe and North Africa, and he's like the most, like, he's not really evil, he loves life, but the greatest and most numerous life in the universe is bacteria and viruses, so he wants to infect everything else with disease. So like people love him. He's Papa Nurgle, and his whole idea is just to spread his children of death across the universe. And so as these things are happening, but like people in our history don't know, because we don't have access to the warp yet. We have a little bit of what's the psychic energy, that's this reflection. So those three gods are born. So the mankind contributes, out of all the races in the universe, mankind contributes to these three gods. We get through the dark age of technology, which is from 1500 to 25,000, in which mankind just does its thing and spreads across the universe. And we don't know much about it. We just know during this time, mankind settles the stars. We have really advanced technology, which becomes important for later, and we become the dominant species across the universe. And during this time, the Eldar from the War in Heaven are still around. They're basically space elves that live forever. We come in contact with them. We're pretty chill. They recognize humankind's kind of superiority. But then we have the Age of Strife, and like two important things happen. One, basically, Terminator Judgment Day happens, where all of our machines rise up against us and start going on a human genocide, and it just absolutely destroys human civilization across the stars. Everyone becomes isolated. It's not a great time. But also, as the Eldari, the space elves, the Eldar, they become so ingratiated in pleasure and lust. They basically become space Romans to an effect, where they get just so carried away in the pleasures of life that their psychic energy borns the chaos god Slaanesh, who, when he is born, it creates this like portal to hell in the universe and kills most of the Eldari race. He basically takes up their souls. Some survive. You get the Eldar proper. These were like Eldar that lived in the stars on craft worlds. That's how they survived. And then you get the Dark Eldar, and in order to combat Slaanesh, basically the Dark Eldar become sadistic BDSM elves. Like, their whole thing is, we're going to just torture and kill and make life a living hell for anyone we capture. They get into piracy and slavery. So you have the dark elves and the light elves. Very original here. But during this time, humanity is spread across the stars. All the worlds pretty much are isolated from one another. The automatons are beaten, but during this time, space travel becomes impossible, because the birth of Slaanesh basically makes the warp, space hell where light speed occurs, extraordinarily dangerous and unpredictable. And this is where the Emperor comes back. Craib, so what does the Emperor do in the year 30,000? So after, towards the end of, the space war against the machines.
So the Emperor spends most of his life, like Carlton was saying, chilling in the background, kind of poking at things, trying to get them to change. And I think after the birth of Slaanesh, he kind of realized that he needed to be a little more proactive about things. And it was about that time that he kind of revealed himself and started uniting clans on Earth, ancient Terra. And I'm pretty sure it started in kind of the India Himalayan region, and it expands out, and he starts messing around with genetics, and he starts creating this race of super soldiers, which would eventually become the Thunder Warriors. And he would use these kind of genetically superior, think about like Russian athletes, but like done right. You know, actually big. If the Russians weren't in charge of doping programs, we actually did a real doping program. It's a group of genetically superior men that are, you know, large, faster reflexes, faster healing, all that jazz. And he basically takes over the planet and then institutes this Primarch program, which I think Mason could explain.
Yeah. So
not to throw you under the bus or anything.
Yeah, so pretty much what happened with the Thunder Warriors, they were great for what the Emperor's goals were on Terra. However, they were unstable. They were prone to all sorts of weird issues, including like super space cancer and stuff like that. So the idea basically was, after that, come up with an idea for a new set of soldiers to go take over the stars and go back and reconquer effectively all the planets that were lost during the Age of Strife. And so, yeah, the Primarch program started where he was going to make 20 perfect genetic sons, partially from his DNA and all sorts of different things.
And they each were supposed to be kind of a different aspect of his being. Right?
And so,
like, we're kind of to be an idealized version of, you know, one facet of humanity.
Right. And so each one was supposed to be like a perfect facet of some aspect of humanity. But things kind of hit the fan, and and so they wound up getting swept out by the Chaos Gods that we mentioned earlier. So Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, and Khorne. And so they got dispersed across the galaxy. And he's like, well, we ain't got time for this. And so he jumped back into the stars with his new super soldiers, who were the Space Marines.
Yeah, we glossed over some heavy shit there. But so allegedly the god emperor like made a deal with the Chaos Gods. When the Chaos Gods figured out he tricked them, the Primarchs may be warp demigods in the human super soldier form. We don't know. And they got spread across the galaxy to other, you know, lost colonies and societies of Earth. So they get raised by different Terran societies, some really good, some turn into gladiators with nails in their heads. That's a spectrum that isn't fantastic for some. And with that, we should probably take our first break before we get into the great crusades of humanity. So we'll be right back with episode 152. A Life in Ruins goes 40K here after these messages. And welcome back to episode 152 of Life Ruins Podcast. I am still here with Alex and Mason, and we were getting into the second half of the lore, and we're almost done through the lore, but this is the critical part, and this is the Great Crusade, in which the God Emperor of mankind like unifies Earth and leads humanity back into the stars to reclaim its lost territory. Mars is like the big number two. They basically become like a super production facility with, you know, human hybrid robots. They're great. And the Emperor is doing two things. One, reconnecting the galaxy, but also two, trying to find his lost sons, the Primarchs. And these are essentially demigods. And out of the demigods' gene seed or DNA, he creates the Space Marine Legions. So there's 20 Primarchs. There are 20 Space Marine Legions. And the Primarchs are made out of different aspects of the God Emperor's DNA and also a different Eternal's DNA. The Primarchs have a mom. I forget her name. And they have different aspects of him. So they're all like 20 pieces of a whole, and each of the Space Marine Legions are a piece of their Primarch father. So they have different attributes, and the Space Marines aren't just roided up people. They have different organs. They have a different biology. Like, to become a Space Marine, it's like the Spartan 2 program from Halo on black tar heroin. It is on a whole different level of how they made these people.
It's like Limitless. They gave them a bunch of that drug to unleash their brains, and they just became super
multiple
smart.
hearts, new organs, like, you know, just look into the lore. Yeah. This is all on YouTube. Like, if you get interested in this, you can go down a YouTube rabbit hole and you can learn all of this. And the first Primarch that gets recovered is
the Lion.
No, he's Primarch number 1, but the first recovered is Horus Luper. No, it's shit. That's right. Damn it. The first official is like Horus Lupercal of the Space Wolves, but technically there's 21 Primarchs because the Alpha Legion, which is the 20th Legion, they're actually twins, Alpharius and Omegon, and it turns out that probably one of them never got lost and was with the Emperor in secret. They're basically like the Emperor's CIA, and they're just like, no one knows they exist for like ever, and apparently one of them is fine. Yeah, that's a whole... Thank you, Mason, for that reminder. But the first official that everyone knows about is Horus Lupercal, who's extremely important later. He has the most time with the Emperor, and he also helps find his recovered brothers.
He's the Emperor's best boy.
Yeah, the best boy. He is the Primarch of the... what are they called?
The Luna Wolves?
Which number
the
are
Luna
they?
Wolves.
Yeah, the Luna Wolves. Oh, the 16th Legion.
16.
And then, like, they all get renamed when they find their Primarch. Their Primarch basically, like, renames the Legion. So they were the Luna Wolves, or they are the Luna Wolves. Yeah,
they were
something. It's a whole...
No, there were Sons of Horus later.
Yeah. And then their home...
they become the Sons of Horus after Ulanor.
That's true. And so... all the Space Marines are basically, they come from Terra, but as they find their Primarch in the Primarch's homeworld, that becomes the new recruiting ground for that Legion. So once Horus is reunited with the Emperor, all the new Luna Wolves, they come from Cathonia. And they all kind of get found. We don't need to go through the list of who gets found when, but open to this, there are 2 lost Legions and 2 lost Primarchs. We know nothing about what happened to them, but something big enough where they were erased from the Imperium's everything. They basically they wiped them from existence, and even went as far to like wipe their memories from their brothers' brains. They know they existed, but they don't know what happened. They forgot. Like, it was basically, they were totally expunged. Part of this is like, it's fun. Second is like, when you make your Space Marine Legion, you can be like, oh, they're the part of the Lost Legion, right? So there's like kind of a marketing aspect to it. But as the universe is almost fully unified, it's like towards the end, and mind you that the technology being used in the Great Crusade is nowhere near the advanced technology that was used in the Age of Technology. Like, it's still not to that level. Like, the ships that we have are basically space cathedrals. Like, it's very different. It's very gothic. It's very, what's the word for it? It's in perfect future. There's a word for it, right?
That's kind of the whole point of it, right? Is that just like how the medieval world was kind of looking back on Roman ruins going, oh my God, the world was amazing during Roman times. We're living in the dark ages of the future, looking back on these wonderful times that existed prior to us. Grimdark, I think, is what you're after. But yeah, the whole idea is that we are living in the modern or the futuristic Middle Ages, where we've lost so much and we're surrounded by all these great things and we don't understand it, but it's here.
Yeah, trying to recover lost technology, lost human societies. And not many worlds went in peacefully because they're like, we don't want to bow down to this space emperor. We don't care. And also, like, a very important aspect of this is the background, what's happening with chaos. The emperor bans all religion. Like, he's like, we're not doing this because he knows religion feeds the chaos gods. And he's like hiding their existence from the universe. He's like doing his best, doesn't tell his sons about chaos, the dangers of the chaos gods. He is actively trying to reclaim the entire universe, get rid of all religion, and like, fingers crossed it kills the chaos gods because he knows how fucking bad news they are. But with this comes, we get all the Primarchs back. Some are better than others in terms of like their mental state. They all have their own little niche. And then while this is going on, the Emperor with his fleets across this the world, like some of these legions, they're like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, Space Marine strong, which is supplementing the Astra Militarum, which is the space army.
millions of human beings.
Millions of people and like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of spacefaring vessels like going across the stars. The Emperor puts remembrancers with a lot of these fleets, and these are artists, historians, like basically people of the liberal arts. Like all the liberal arts majors that can't get jobs today, they get sent on ships and spread across the galaxy to record everything.
They got a lot of jobs during this time.
They all became war correspondents.
Yeah, basically. And so they were trying to record everything. And then also the cultures they're coming into, and they're like reestablishing these lost human worlds back into the Imperium. And it's like, but then we get the Horus Heresy. Who wants to take a crack at explaining how Horus falls to chaos?
Oh God!
We don't need to go into the lodges or the demon sword. Mason, you look like you're chomping at the bit to talk about Horus's fall to chaos.
I'm just trying to figure it out how to say this the quickest way possible. Oh man!
A real quick way is like one of the Primarchs. Fuck, what is his name?
Lorgar.
It's Lorgar and
Lorgar.
What's his name?
Erebus.
Fuck Erebus.
Fuck Erebus. Lorgar.
Erebus.
He
Erebus
is
is the chaplain of the Word Bearers Legion, whose Primarch is Lorgar.
All right,
Yes.
so I'm going to say something. If I'm wrong, my bad. Basically, what I recall is Horus and his Legion go hang out on a planet, and they're trying to take it over, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of weird chaos stuff happening. There's a bunch of weird little Davin is the name of the planet.
Yeah.
Which is a great name, by the way. Davin. Just has a good verbiage.
Damn it, Davin!
Fucking Davin. Anyway, so Horus goes and hangs out. He's trying to take over this place, and he gets hurt, which is surprising because he's a fucking Primarch. And anyway, he gets cut. And we're going to skip a couple of little steps, but long story short, the only way to heal him, he winds up getting taken into this lodge to be taken care of. And turns out that there are a bunch of cultists and start kind of getting him into the chaos lifestyle. And he realizes that he's super here for it. And long story short, he jumps chaos and starts rebelling against the Emperor.
Yes, and the people that convert him, and the people that convert him are primarily from the 17th Legion under Lorgar. His real quick backstory is he worshipped the Emperor as a god, and every world he brought into compliance converted them to basically a religion of the Emperor, which comes up later. The Emperor's like, I fucking told you we don't do religion. Sent in the Ultramarines, the 13th Legion, and genocides the homeworld and says, Lorgar, we're not a fucking god. Like, stop it. During his basically his sad boy phase, his chaplain Erebus is like, oh, I do know of gods. They do exist. And like brings Lorgar into chaos. How Erebus finds out about the chaos gods, there's a whole book about it. So they kind of set the stage to turn Horus, basically. And that's how this starts. Horus gets tainted by chaos and turns against the Emperor, secretly turns half of his brothers against his father, and the loyalist legions, creates the Istvan atrocity where it's a whole fucking thing. The universe goes in galactic civil war. The loyalist Primarchs get scattered because fucking towards the end of the Great Crusade, Horus is made War Master, so the Emperor can go back and basically create a different way of traveling through the universe, and everyone is upset that their father left them, and they put their brother in charge, and they're all like super, jocks that want to be like daddy's big boy, so some are jealous. It's just crazy.
Emo dicks that are like, daddy doesn't love me, he left me out here and put me in charge.
And Horus capitalizes on this and betrays the Emperor, betrays his brothers, kills one of them outright at the Istvan, and the world is set in flames. And it ends in like space opera style, Horus versus daddy. Horus like hurts the Emperor because the Emperor can't quite do it, because Horus is completely overwhelmed with chaos god energy. Like some of his brothers become like paragons or antagons, I don't know, of the chaos gods. So there's like 4 that basically become, worship their own god, demons.
Demon Primarchs.
And it's a fucking mess, but like the Emperor wins, basically kills Horus with mind bullets and erases him from existence. The traitors flee. The Emperor, wounded, gets put upon the Golden Throne, which is keeping it. He's basically becomes a space zombie, and his mental energy is lighting a universal lighthouse to make space travel happen. And ever since then, like 10,000 basically human psychers, basically warlocks, are sacrificed to him every day to feed his psychic energy. It's not a great time to be a human. Like the lore of Warhammer 40k is fucked. So this all happens in the year 30,000. There's basically a time jump. The Primarchs are basically gone. There's 2 that just came back. 1 just came back, which is the impetus for this. Like it was a huge reveal that Lionel Johnson of the First Legion has come back.
What? Lion's back!
Of the Dark Angels. So that's where we are. But with this, there's like a couple things that we've talked about. The Necrons are back too. They're the Necrons here from earlier. And we're also in this grimdark period of this future that looks back on the past, and they're still actively looking at the past for information. So people worship the God Emperor. They basically took Lorgar's book of the Daddy Bible and instituted it after the God Emperor's death, and it's just made things so bad. It's basically like Warhammer 40k is the Catholic Church on black tar heroin and feudalism. It's not a good time.
Russian super soldiers, man.
So how does archaeology fit into all this? We've hit a couple points. There's clearly a very long and deep time of the universe that spans millions of years of various alien races, of various levels of advanced technology. And the primary, like, I guess, archaeologists, I guess to say, from humans, the human standards, is the Adeptus Mechanicus. Craib, what is the Adeptus Mechanicus?
So during the whole Age of Strife, so humans colonized the cosmos, right? And then the Age of Strife happened, and we all went back to Earth, and there were disparate colonies all over the place. One of our colonies was Mars, and the Mars colony basically started worshiping a machine god and devoted themselves to understanding engineering, mechanics, stuff like that. And the Mechanicum is essentially a semi-church, semi-corporation that is focused on technology and maintaining it, but also finding what they call new technology. I'm doing air quotes because what new technology in the 41st millennia is actually just finding old technology that was better, particularly in the form of these things called standard template constructs, which are like these really smart machines that produce different kinds of materials in mass at very high quality. So like an STC, a standard template construct, could be for tanks, like an armored personnel carrier, like the Rhino in 40K. They found an STC of a Rhino, and it's this kind of perfect machine basis for carrying troops. And the Mechanicum is always after these STCs, always after esoteric knowledge, always after lost technology. So it's kind of the basis of their mandate.
And they're also like these aren't people. Like the Mechanicus like turn themselves basically into living robots.
The big thing with Mechanicus is that they believe the closer to like the machine they are, the closer they are to their god. So they try to replace as much as they can of their body with robotics, and then they have a bunch of crazy science, so like really just their neurons to be able to control this stuff. But you wind up with these like giant monstrosities are the priests of the Mechanicus and constantly trying to chase out these old technologies. And one other thing that's important to say in terms of the Mechanicus is they're within the context of the cult Mechanicum, all the religion there is they don't believe in, I guess, like engineering and creating their own new technology all that much. There's a bunch of stuff against that and taboos against creating technology. Hence why they're always trying to find old stuff and looking for these old STCs, because the STCs themselves,
it's almost like
for companies.
development.
Yeah, so they were made for trying to go pioneer new planets. And so the idea was you could have this machine with you to build literally anything you could ever need for your colony as you're going to this new planet that's never been explored. And so there's only elements of it that exist left. And so the Mechanicus are always trying to find anything they can of these technologies that have been lost to try to bring to the 40th millennium.
All in the context that Xenos technology is fucking heresy, can't touch it, can't reverse engineer it. New technology is also forbidden. And also, like, these people aren't that, like, if your laptop broke, they'd pray over it because they believe, like, every machine has its spirit. Like, this is a backwards ass technician where they've created a religion around machines, and they're even further back. Like, if Warhammer 30,000, like the Crusade, is pales in comparison to humanity's the age of technology, 40K pales in comparison to 30K. Like, they can't create their own shit. They're basically scavengers. They lost how to, like, fix things, essentially. They know kind of how, but, like, and also AI is forbidden. Like, after the Age of Strife, where the automatons rose up, not allowed to have AI. And so how do things work? Oh, if you're a heretic or a bad person, they lobotomize you and turn your brain into basically a processor, and you become a floating skull with lights, and you like video cameras are literally a floating human head, like skull and cerebellum, with a fucking lens put in one of the eye holes. Like, it's not great. There's a lot of skulls. There's a lot of skulls, you know.
It's kind of like the Paris catacombs.
Yeah. And these are the people that are in charge of, like, going out and recovering lost human technology from 30K, but also from the not Great Crusade, but the Age of Technology. Like, there's a fun short story where basically people from the Age of Technology develop a time traveling device and actually time travel to the year 40,000 and try to make contact with the Imperium. They all get fucking tortured as heretics. And the ship is so advanced, they don't know what the Mechanicus doesn't know what to do with it. Space Marines don't know what to do with it. And there's an AI on board that is absolutely fucking livid with what's happened and what's happened to humanity, is able to, like, infiltrate the Space Marine, armor and suit, shuts them down. And the Mechanicum just starts praying and waving incense, like trying to calm down the machine spirit. And then it's just like this AI is like, what the fuck happened? Because it's like, yeah, you
killed my crew.
Yeah, you killed my crew. Like, what the fuck? Like, who? It's just like things just went so ass backwards.
So one other thing I want to mention really just quickly is we keep talking about, like, 40K and all this stuff, what they're doing. One thing that is, I think, really important to note within the world of 40K and that universe is there's been kind of a massive loss of knowledge, and people are kind of just doing these rites that they know that makes technology work, and it's become ritualized and part of, like, religion and all these things that you just do. There is no real understanding of how the technology works or how to fix it. Hence why people are constantly trying to find STCs and why they're trying to do all of these things to get new technology, keep things working. There is no real understanding of the inner mechanics of, like, how the ship works or how the gun works. This is just what you do. You put oil on it and then you praise it.
Yeah, and there's factions of the Mechanicum that have their own STCs and won't share it. And as Mason said, they're not allowed to innovate. There is one dude who it does innovate, and he's kind of seen as heretical. And like we said, 2 Primarchs returned. Like, they're gone for 10,000 years. They come back, and they're like, what the fuck happened to our daddy's empire? And they're, like, kind of lost too, basically through this time skip. And, like, they remember 30K. And they're like, holy shit, we can't even build new things anymore unless we have these basic 3D printers that will do it for us. Our dad's being worshipped as gods. We're being worshipped as demigods. And they remember the time where there was no religion. Like, they remember innovation because that's what their dad was, a super scientist. That was part of his thing. And they're trying to slowly bring that back. But in the context of, like, if we piss off the church, they will get rid of us. If we piss off these other factions of humankind, they get rid of us. So they're trying to navigate it as well and work with the Mechanicum of, like, trying to bring, because at this point the human empire is just receding. The Imperium, man, it's not a great time. I think the average lifespan of a human, if you're not in the elite class, is like 20 years, like something super short. It's not great. And we're being attacked by space bugs, space elves, space orcs. space Buddhists or space communists. Like we're like the whole Imperium is just like retracting because we're being assaulted from all age. And then the Necrons are back from 40 million years ago.
Also, the 60 million years ago, the Necrons are back. They're hanging out. Robots living the dream. Yeah, straight up not Prime.
Yeah. And with that, we'll go ahead and end section 2, and we're going to get how these races in 40K, like how this archaeology is actually occurring. Like, what does that look like? And how, if everything is basically becomes heresy if you touch it, how does you actually gain knowledge in this really fucked up dystopian future? Later. And welcome back with episode 152. So continuing on this conversation of archaeology, like archaeology that is existing within the Warhammer 40K universe, but then also, talking conceptually, like how the fuck would we as modern day archaeologists do if we were like time warped into 40K and would not be branded heretics immediately? How would you actually do some of this and like excavate these sites? Because like, how would you actually do it other than basically doing Indiana Jones style archaeology, which is primarily what 40K is, of like going into known places and looting for technology. Mason mentioned earlier the Landites, who are also known as the Landists, and these are a subcult within the Adeptus Mechanicus. And they're disciples of the techno-archaeologist Arkan Land. So there are archaeologists, they're techno-archaeologists specifically. And so he finds this STC, which Craib mentioned, in the Liberius Omnis. Basically, the whole language of what they call High Gothic in 40K is like English words with like fucking, what's the opposite of a suffix? Like Latin suffixes. You just like kind of Latinize it a little bit.
Us.
Yeah, you add us a lot. Yeah, us, nis. So because they find this Helios pattern and the Prometheus pattern, basically vehicles, but the Landites in 39,000, they basically get genocided because they take the knowledge from these, archaeo vehicles to create a new vehicle. And that's heretical, as we mentioned before. The belief in this time is that the God Emperor Mankind, everything he created was perfect, and you shouldn't fuck with God's creations. And if you do, you're a heretic, unless you're the guy that created the Primaris Marines, in which you get a pass because the demigod gave you the thumbs up. That's a whole thing we don't need to go into. And he created and part of that was Games Workshop needed people to buy more models, and they created a whole fleet of new vehicles and a whole set line of new Space Marines.
We need big boys that are easier to pay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So much easier. But the Landites still exist. So these techno-archaeologists still exist, and they have to do it in secret. And so they're looking for missing patterns of vehicles, though, and they're trying to create better vehicles. So they're under this part of the Mechanicus, these cultists like understand like the Emperor was still, even though he's a god, like we can improve upon it, especially with the Primaris Marines and their vehicles and stuff. Like they recognize there's still improvement, right? That's how much knowledge has been lost in 10,000 years. It's like we've basically taken several steps back. As that's going on, the Necrons briefly, they're awakening and they're trying to find their old Necrons. Not all of them have awakened. So they're trying to awaken other Necron societies. And it's basically like space Egyptians. Well, at the same time, there are some people in the Adeptus Mechanicus like actively looking for Necron technology and trying to find, what is his name? The Betrayer. Not the Betrayer. What the hell is his name? The guy that ended up killing the Catan.
The Deceiver.
The Deceiver. Yeah. That whole thing.
Or you think of the Moon Dragon that may or may not be the Messiah
the Dragon of Mars. Yes.
Yeah. May or may not be a Satan.
Yeah, God damn it. There's a lot. There's so much nonsense. But if you like actually look at this world, like a lot of this lore sets up multi-component sites of like what's happening. Like there's a blank period before 30,000. We have no idea what the technology. All the lore tells us, the books tells us, it's like super advanced technology, the pinnacle of the human race. We don't know much about it. Terminator Judgment Day happens. And then we basically turn everything's a super cathedral. All the ships are cathedrals, just like Google Warhammer 40K ships. It's basically the Notre Dame with engines and a lot of guns traveling along the stars. But like even just shit, we were talking in the interim about like how would you excavate Mars? Like how do you excavate, places like God damn, who are they're Astra Militarum, that one army from the World War I planet.
Indians or the Vrax, the Siege of Vrax.
So they fight at Vrax, but it's a specific, I can't forget what planet they come from.
The Death Legion.
The Death Legion, yeah. Oh gosh, this is gonna bug me. Gotta look it up. 40K World War I army. Krieg, the Death Corps of Krieg. Yes. Like, how do you excavate a world that used to be a paradise and then went to a civil war and nuclear holocaust? Right. Like if we were to actually do this work similar to like, because we've lost, unlike the Middle Earth series, which we talked about, where me and David basically did like a 40-minute segment before we realized, oh wait, elves exist and they're immortal and they could just tell you don't need archaeologists. In this world, the Eldar hate primarily humans, even though they're also mortal. They don't give a shit about humans anymore, and so we're not talking to them. They're not giving us our history. In this universe, and if you're a poor, lowly person in the 41st millennium, how do you try to uncover human history across the stars?
You're talking about digging through some serious construction, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. When you asked that question, my first thought is like, how do you find hunter-gatherer stuff? After all this serious modification.
Because like the Emperor's Palace is literally Tibet. Like it is the size of Tibet, if not larger. Like,
I mean, there's nothing left. There's nothing left on Terra in terms of like trying to find like hunter-gatherer.
There's no oceans on Terra. Like the world has been so fucked. There's not oceans. It is Coruscant in absolute decay. Like there's Star Wars lore about the lower levels of Coruscant are shitty. The hive cities is what they're called in 40K are
turned the entire Himalaya mountain range into his fortress complex.
Yeah.
I mean that
the entire Himalayas are his house.
Yeah.
And then also the rest of the planet is just one city. There is nothing else.
Yeah, and it's not great if you're at the lower levels. Like most people on a hive city never see the light of day. Their lifespan, they maybe make it to 30.
Antarctica.
They know their name.
So I think Terra, in terms of like the archaeology there, is horrifying. I don't know how to like excavate that. I mean, like you can look at like crazy levels of like superposition and create some interesting hypotheses about how these like hive cities were built, but at the same time, like how do there's so many layers to it. It's just the most stressful thing to think about.
Do we know that from Nagasaki and Hiroshima, how nuclear blasts impact urban areas and then how they're built back up, and what does that look like in an archaeological context? Because a big part of the Warhammer 40K universe is that you have these massive nuclear wars occurring on Earth that kind of wipes it all clean, and then the Emperor rises out of these nuclear wars to take control of Terra. So I imagine we'd have to look at how do nuclear wars and nuclear warheads affect urban areas, and the only two that I can think of are, of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah, so Hiroshima has been absolutely rebuilt, and they've left a couple places. So like, the A-bomb dome was secured in the 1960s, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But there has to be like, I imagine a layer of glass.
I have no idea.
Somewhere in the strata, there has to be some sort of like almost like a volcanic event where like there is pre-World War II material, a fucking crater at one point. Like there's definitely geologic. You could see the backfill, and then they had to have cleaned it from the radioactive material.
I have no idea. Yeah,
I think what happens a million challenges. Like I don't know, for some reason, like the Columbia River Gorge is coming into my head right now in terms of like the sheer geology and confusion, what's happening there in terms of all these massive floods. So for listeners, Columbia River Gorge was subject to tons of like pretty much like glacial ice would come down, build a big lake, and then lake would burst through and then rip through this gorge and then create this really complex series of geology. And the problem that hit there, and I think what would happen in 40K, is you have a series of like really complex events that would wipe out part of what was previously existing. So you're only left with like minor little clues here and there about what happened before that would erode all the things that happened to be there that were constantly set in one another. And so I think something like that would happen in 40K in terms of it's always war. There's always going to be nukes. These hive cities are constantly building each other, ripping out what was there beforehand. And so you get urban archaeology on steroids.
Yeah, like even like there's so many, like it's not even old wood, but like old tech problems. Like even in the age of strife, before the God Emperor Mankind reunified Terra, it was run by like techno barbarians and crazy shit where they're, you know, for like 10,000 years, like, or 4,000 years, like constantly reusing old technology and to create these really fucked up fiefdoms. And so like like you couldn't even, like even just trying to like identify, create like a seriation of artifacts would be like impossible in many contexts.
Oh, especially when we're talking about between like gap of like 30 to 40K, where they're still using a lot of the same technologies. Like the primary thing for like the Space Marines, the way to like figure out where you are in time is their make and model of like armor. But there's like what, 6 different variations of Astartes armor?
10 tops.
Yeah. Over 10,000 years.
Yeah.
And then you get chaos and the warp into it where they're reusing stuff and time flows differently and it just goes to a whole different thing.
Yes, there's a Mark 10 power armor, and that's it. Yeah,
so 10 over 10,000 years.
That's like fancy boy power armor before we get into Primaris.
Well, one armor is thunder power armor, so that's like what the Thunder Warriors used even before 30K.
And I think the Heresy model.
Let's see, Thunder Warriors were what, 28, 29, something.
Yes, there? 12,000 years. So basically, over the course of human colonization of the Americas, they changed armor maybe 10 times.
And then also one of those isn't really real. It's just because it was during the Heresy and they just kept taking parts of other armor kits. Yeah. And like, whoa, I guess we'll call this one a number. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a Mark 6.
Yeah, and then there's Terminator armor, and then like all of them have their own special, like, you know, speciations. Like each, you know, legion does its own thing. And then like, and we didn't even fucking talk about like, after the Heresy, all the legions got broke up and you got chapters. And so now there's like hundreds of Space Marine chapters doing their own thing. It's just...
We didn't even scratch the surface of 40K lore.
Yeah.
And we did a shit job explaining it.
You know, and it's like you can't even, like with the technology, because like I guess you could see up until the Age of Strife, advances in technology where they're definitely done a certain way, but like after that you have like a 4,000 year period of just crazy basically Fallout weaponry and technology.
Oh yeah, you get like the techno barbarians on Terra. And so I mean, one thing we probably didn't chat too much about, but in terms of like during the Age of Strife, things weren't chill on Terra, and that's kind of why like that Big Daddy Emperor decided to jump in and try to help. But like it took him longer to take over Terra than it did for most of the Great Crusade.
Yeah. It took a while.
And the entire time, like, they referred to everyone else as, like, techno-barbarians, which is, one, the coolest thing I've ever heard. And then, two, their armor was just anything they could scramble on and all this kind of wild stuff. And so in terms of, like, trying to, like, identify that in terms of archaeology and try to develop a seriation, I have no idea where to begin.
It's definitely like planet specific, because if we think about Caliban, the home of the First Legion, and like imagine it to get blown up at the end of the Heresy, not talking about it, but it goes from being colonized, being part of the age of technology, it gets cut off from the universe, they regress basically into like a knight feudalistic society, but it doesn't get destroyed. They basically have, you know, low-key powered knight armor. They use pistols and swords. And then there's a definite, like, when they get reconnected with the Imperium. Like, there's a you could seriate that, I think, pretty well, because like that planet's heavily forested.
But then what about Fenris and the Space Wolves, where absolutely nothing changed? And they were just like, no, we love our barbaric lifestyle. We love being
the Space Vikings. Yeah. So there's definitely points in time of like outside of Terra, initial colonization, seriation up until the Eye of Terror opens with the birth of Slaanesh. And then some get what's the word that they use when they bring compliant? Some, planets go into compliance willingly. Some don't. So there's definitely like capital cities that depending on the Legion, if Angron and the World Eaters show up, your planet is fucking done for. So there's a layer of just absolute destruction. And then, the seriation of like, this is the Imperial buildings. Like they have that plan, but like there's planets that get
going up and rebuilding a new Rome or a new Athens.
Exactly.
I'm also curious, like they'll talk about like, let's say like the Night Lords show up. A lot of times in the Crusade, Night Lords, their entire shtick is like they're terrifying, horrifying, and horrible. So they show up, people give up, go into compliance. They talk about destroying and rebuilding everything within the Imperial fashion. But what does that destruction look like? Are they like doing like actually like just knocking stuff down? Is there any kind of destruction debris? Is there any kind of like ways to rebuild what it may have looked like in the past? Or are they straight up just like melting everything, glassing it? What's happening there?
Are we talking syncretism, erase, or full replacement?
Yeah. Like what are we looking at?
I think the ones that don't go compliant willingly get absolutely rebuilt the Imperial way. But like when the Emperor comes across Robert Gilliman in the 13th, and he has his own little empire already, they're largely left intact. Sanguinius, when he's connected on Ball, they really don't even rebuild that. Like some of those planets don't even really get rebuilt. They get kind of left alone. And, Ball becomes basically like a sand planet, like Tatooine, with like radioactive scorpions. And they just kind of let the Primarch do his thing, and they don't really change it. So there's like definitely variance into how some worlds get brought back into the Empire. And it's just like, Terra is a fucking archaeological nightmare. Some of the others you'd be able to do more stratified archaeology and figure things out and have a seriation of cultures and artifacts. But there's like a holistic, I guess, like K2 layer in all the planets for the most part, right? Where like the birth of Slaanesh is a major galactic event that is similar to like what wiped out the dinosaurs on Earth. Like you can find that ash layer across the planet. I would imagine you would have that similar K2 boundary in human colonized worlds across the galaxy, where there's very much one form of technology and then it changes.
Definitely.
Pre and post contact from the Great Crusade too.
Yeah.
I would imagine just with, natural deviation in technology that occurs over 10,000 years, and then all of a sudden a reestablishment of the Mechanicum's relatively strict doctrines of what technology has to be. I imagine you would see some sort of, Mount Mazama type layer where there's one and then all of a sudden there's another.
I imagine like similar to like a Roman layer. Like when Romans expand out, they're coexisting with the previous indigenous, and then they bring the Roman package with them. Like I imagine it's the same. And like, just like, the Romans had various levels of influence upon colonization. So I imagine it's similar to the Imperium. If we look at the Empire Man as, the space Romans, where you have that same sort of.
And I'm sure you'll see something similar. Like I'm thinking of, you mentioned Caliban earlier. Caliban was a chaos planet, kind of a little bit, right?
Yeah, it was a death world.
And so, like, I think I remember like seeing like art of the Primarch that was there, all of his stuff in 30K. It was very spiky, very chaosy, all this kind of stuff. But thinking about the seriation of how you look at the artifacts from that assemblage, let's say you have something that was pre-chaos, post-Great Crusade.
You
look at
pre-Lion in Caliban, and then the Lion showing up and how that impacted Caliban's artifacts and the way that they created their weapons of war.
Yeah. Because a lot of those, there's probably, that's a second layer, because like many Primarchs ended up unifying their home planets. Some
they had
not so much. Yeah. Of like,
but yeah, you probably like use that as some way of like artifactually in terms of what's changing in terms of manufacture or what's happening. Like I was thinking of Nostromo, Night Lords area. When do things become more efficient? When do you see like better tools and all this stuff, ignoring all of the horrors of Conrad Kurz? But there'd be some level of change in terms of the assemblages you would see, right?
Yeah. And it's all variant on which Primarch, because like, Conrad becomes like evil space Batman and rules his planet by just sheer fucking terror and terrorizing the mobs and gangs that run the planet into like chilling out.
Yeah. So,
and then of course there's planets that, they get absolutely wiped out. Like, spoiler alert, Caliban blows up at the end of the Heresy and becomes, Space High Charity from Halo. It's, like, that's what happens to that planet. So many nerdy references coming out, but it's like, it would be cool. Like if there was one universe I'd like to be an archaeologist, it'd probably be the Star Wars universe. It wouldn't be 40K. 40K is a fucking nightmare. Like even just from the archaeology, if it was legalized, like it's just, like I don't want to be excavating somewhere and then these glowing green automatons from like 60 million years come out and start destroying the planet.
I feel like the risk of death in the 40K universe is much higher than every other fictional universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Sweet. Well, I hope this was informative to some people. I know like we do have 40K. I've talked about 40K a couple times on this podcast and I get people reached out and like, so I hope this was beneficial to some people. Like we enjoy doing episodes like this where we bring on our friends to talk about something like archaeology adjacent or just, nerdy fandom. It's not dogs. So there's that. But before we end,
David,
but before we end the show, Alex and Mason, what are a couple sources? These could be articles, books, videos that you'd recommend for anyone interested in Warhammer 40K. I'll go out and say like the first 3 novels of the Horus Heresy, fantastic.
Yep. I was going to say that.
Yeah. I love reading about, you basically like my favorite, like the 2 favorite Space Marine Legions I love reading, or a couple. I love reading about the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, and Alpha Legion, and then also Thousand Sons. So you just kind of pick out of the 100, I think over 180 books now. You basically kind of find your favorites and you look for those books. Anything written by Guy Haley is pretty good, and that's all Horus Heresy. That's a whole different series. And
Dan Abnett is going to be wonderful as well.
Fantastic.
If you want like a real nice like soft introduction to like 40K, the Eisenhorn series I think is pretty good by Dan Abnett. It's kind of what got me starting to get interested in the lore. Titanicus is also a great, just like one-off great book. It's a lot of fun. Highly recommend it. Yeah.
I love Nids and Blood Angels, so I like the 40K series about when the Blood Angels fought the Tyranids. The devastation of Baal is one of my favorite. That's a good one. There's some amazing YouTubers out there. Games Library, which creates the Warhammer series. You go to their website. We'll put that down below. Games Workshop. Black Library, which is their publishing house, has a bunch of those. Yes. So Craib just mentioned Major Kill. If you want basically an ADHD buffed out Australian telling you about Warhammer, I love him. Some people hate him, but I love his energy. He's so good. Sexy. Yeah.
If you guys are interested in like a good wiki, Lexicanum is a wonderful fan sourced outlet or reference for 40K.
I also enjoy if you're a Reddit nerd and spend a lot of time on Reddit, 40K Lore is a wonderful subreddit full of tremendous human beings that have a lot to say about this whole nerddom.
Major Kill's a good one. I also like Voldemort. He's pretty good. There's one guy, I think it's Oculus Imperia, where he talks to the lore like he's an Adeptus librarian. Where he's like telling you if he was actually a lore guy himself, like reiterating the lore of 40K from the perspective of a historian in that time. I fall asleep to him a lot because like he has such a smoothing, chill voice. What do you guys got?
Well, I was saying I tend to go to like 40K lore on Reddit and just kind of hang out and read a bunch of random posts. And then kind of also, if I can't sleep, that's kind of one of my go-to things. Start looking at 40K lore on Reddit.
Yeah, it's Jesus. There's a lot of really good content, and like Warhammer blew up. I think a lot of people reconnected during the pandemic because you could just order it and paint, and it. So like a lot of people, I only played the game like a couple times. Like I just enjoy painting, like especially as an archaeologist or an academic, like the fact that I just have to sit there with a model and just think about painting like zens me out.
I was always interested in 40K and like the Warhammer universe and all this kind of stuff. But what really kind of spurred me to actually take the dive and start like nerding out about it was during the pandemic. I just really wanted to have a hobby. And so I just started painting a bunch of 40K, reading a ton of like random 40K stuff on the internet. And it's amazing. Had a lot of fun over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I have a couple models. I haven't painted. So like the ones that I showed Craib earlier, like my Devastation of Ball Captain. I actually, a buddy of mine from undergrad, he got his degree in art. His name is Ethan. And he is a professional Warhammer 40K painter. And like I think one of my models is on the website. Like he gets featured. I kind of helped him a little bit with like how to do more Instagram stuff. But if you look him up, he's Handys_hobbies, HANDYS_HOBBIES. His whole channel is stuff he paints and gets commissioned to. And like what I love about his posts is he does like a real quick piece of the lore about them. So like his content has gotten fantastic, and I really love going to him. Right now, I think he has like over a dozen commissions of the Lions model. Wow. And he knows his shit.
Sexy. That model is really sexy.
I'm gonna have to text him because like this guy, as a
fanboy, I in a completely unbiased perspective on it. Just saying.
I'm just looking at it and trying to figure out how to like convert it to Iron Warriors.
He has a bunch, so like it's kind of funny because like right now, of course, everything is
iron within, iron without.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember mine are on there, but he's like gotten Dorn. He's done 30K models, so like if you're interested, just to see like a variance of the different kinds of stuff, because like in the Warhammer community, there's God knows so many different armies. Every faction has sub armies in different units. Like the variance is crazy, and they're really fun to paint. Like I'll never paint Chaos. Like the Chaos Marines, like trying to play, like if I can't, I would commit suicide trying to paint a Plague Marine. I think
it's so fun. You just be sloppy, do what you want.
Jason might be Papa Nurgle's second acolyte.
Yeah,
I mean, like, I want to see. I mean, look at my dirty like Black Templars.
That's a dirty boy.
It's still a good looking Black Templar. But how do they play? Because I've always liked, because I like shooty still, and I was thinking about doing Imperial Fists. Do they play well on the like? I guess you've never played.
I've never played, so I have no idea. I just like painting shit.
Fair.
Templars got to play more like the Blood Angels. It's got to be more kind of close combat, fast in your face.
Yeah, and they all have different play styles. I mean, shit, with the orcs, in order for if you paint it yellow, it goes faster. That's in the rules. Legit.
I don't know, paint it red, right?
No, paint it yellow goes faster.
Oh,
paint it like orc. There's a paint it red. I think that makes the explosions bigger.
I thought red goes faster.
Oh, no, red isn't necessarily for the Cult of Speed.
Yellow is the Cult of Speed, isn't it?
Yellow is Cult of Speed, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, no, there is also painting it red makes it go faster. There's Jesus fuck. Yeah, orcs get weird. They are basically...
The other thing is everything in 40K is contradictory. There's that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Anyways, guys, so we got to end this. Jesus, our producer's going to kill me. Craib, where can our listeners find you on social media?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram at El Craibo. That is Spanish for the Craibo. That's probably the easiest place to find me.
And Mason, where can our followers find you?
I don't have social media, but I don't know, just email me.
Find them through me.
I'll put their Instagram. I'll put Craib's Instagram and their emails both down below. And thank you for joining us today, Alex and Mason. If given the chance again, would you still choose to live a life in 40K ruins?
I mean, if I can be like a daka all yellow orc, then I'm going to go with yes.
Sure.
Gotta get them teeth. Yeah, it's a fucking miserable existence. Well, everyone, we just interviewed Mason Niquette and Alex Craib, both CRM archaeologists, just across the river from me. You can find their contact information down below. Please be sure to rate and review the podcast. Provide us with feedback on whichever podcasting platform you're listening to. So on Apple, you can give us the reviews. We love listening to them. And if you're listening on the All Shows feed, please consider not and subscribing directly to our show. It helps us build subscribers, one, and then two, it allows us to get advertisers and sponsors. I do want to let everyone know that for a long time, the podcast was hovering around 5,000 or 6,000 downloads a month. And I'm really happy and excited to mention, for the past 2-3 months now, we've routinely gotten over 15,000 downloads a month. So we had talked about this before. We've always wanted to supersede the Dirt even before they left. And we've actually done that based on their numbers. We're really glad all of you have stood by our side as we've gone through this. It's about to be summertime again, which means that it's going to be a shit show again. So yeah, please remember, if you review the podcast, we'll send you a sticker one day. So yeah, with that, we are out. Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer.
Hey, why was the lithic analyst late to the meeting?
Because he's flaky.
Because he was flake.
Hey. Fuck it, we'll keep it. All right, thank you, Mason. No, we'll just keep that. That's good. No, Mason told the joke this time because I was taking too long. All right, we're really out now.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop the latest school styles with an extra 25% off during Tanger Style, our biggest sale of the season, now through August 25th. Plan your trip at tanger.com.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop the latest school styles with an extra 25% off during Tanger Style, our biggest sale of the season, now through August 25th. Plan your trip at tanger.com.